take this ecological devastation that is taking place. Of course, it is claimed that as I told earlier, that the ecological problems which are created by science and technology can be solved by means of science and technology, which from my point of view is very, very problematic, and we should discuss it later at length, in another lecture. If you consider the ecological sort of devastation that is going on, then the future looks rather bleak. And in fact, throughout the world, you see, there is no more the old faith in science. There was in the 19th century, when Marx lived, there was the hope that science is the herald of a new age, it is savior of the world and all the problems will be solved. That is no more there. So that sort of naive hope in indefinite progress in science and so on, that's no more. And secondly, if you take the whole situation of the world, and look at it from the point of view of the developing countries, not probably from your point of view, unless you put yourself in our skill, there's not much hope. You should deal with it more at length later, because we are actually going through a period of neo-imperialism and neo-colonialism. It is particularly this explosion to media and the communications and all that. There's going to be a terrific, catastrophic, an intellectual, mental invasion of the country, of third world countries. And this is going to be the serious problem. And as for hope, I think there is some hope for the middle class in India, this new economic policy in India and all that. Those who are going to benefit are the 150 million middle class in India. But we have in India 850 million people. So, what hope for them? Of course, there will be some trickling effect of development, what the so-called trickle effect of trickling. But for the vast majority, there is not much hope.
You've been speaking about that conception is against everything which is unique, is that right? That conception, competition is against that what is unique. And my question is, don't we have to say that it is a question of the base where it is against unique? Because
of the base?
Where it is against unique. Because I think it is right for the mass of the people, but if we have a capitalist system, for instance, and you have a good idea, you seem to have the chance to do something out of it. So that, in my kind of view, would mean to support the unique and not to be against the unique.
That is, you see, in the capitalist system, you see, those who already have the means of production, they have to some extent a choice. Suppose you are born to a fairly well-to-do family. You can choose to become a doctor or a poet or an artist, you can develop your unique faculties, you see. But that choice is denied to the vast majority because the concentration of capital in the hands of some is at the expense of the vast majority who have been deprived of. You see, that's the problem. And what about the vast majority of people? You see, they have no choice at all. No choice at all.
The question there then be whether the problem is with competition in itself, or whether it's with inequalities of competition. Would there be a distinction, draw a distinction between that? Suppose everybody were able, which is obviously not the case, but suppose everyone were able to compete freely, would that suppress the individual?
Yes.
So that everybody had free access to education, for instance. If everybody could go to good schools, if you could provide good schools for everyone, would competition itself then be the problem, or is the problem an inequality of access to the
In that case, I think competition will be less of a dehumanizing problem, But competition as a problem will remain because, you see, the meaningfulness of competition. When you take suppose all of you are well placed economically, you see, but you are a politically minded person, and that's your strong point, That's the contribution you can make to humanity, and you are a compassionate person. You are very helpful. You are very serviceable. You can do social work, and that's the contribution you can make. Find fulfillment, And you are a mathematician. You have that capacity. Therefore, naturally, it is in that line you have to make a contribution. You can develop your personality. You can compliment others, and so on. You see, so competition becomes sort of meaningless. One can speak of sort of an emulation. I'm late. That fellow is working very hard. Whereas I'm lazy. I should be like him. I should be. In fact, when I was in the middle school, I was I neglected my studies when I was very small, in the primary school and all that. We used to get 0 and all that. I improved later when I came to the middle school because there were 2 or 3 boys who were doing well, who were also of very good character, and there was no competition of emulation. You emulate, you try to improve, you become like him, I too must do well, that sort of thing. That's okay. That's a positive sort of value. But what is the meaning of my competing? I'm a poet, my competing with you. I should be, more mathematically minded than you who are gifted mathematically. First. So shouldn't we recognize uniqueness of individuals even when in a society where we have sort of economic equality, you see?
And we think of that as individual right.
John?
That if I want, I can compete.
But can we speak of a right to deny your own uniqueness and become something else? For instance, what's the meaning of that? The meaningfulness of that, you see. And even for society as a whole, what a boring class this would be if all of you were MS sociology. Your background, all of you were MS sociology. It will be boring, sort of a class. You see, you have different academic background, you have different cultural background. Therefore, there is a pluralism. There is a possibility of unity. You see, the Sayyada Shabda, the Christian thinker, you have heard of him, is a Jesuit mystic. A scientist also. He died some years ago. He made in one of his books, he says, it is diversity that unifies. Suppose we are all MA sociology, how can we, what have we to gift each other? Nothing. I can give you something because I have a different academic background, I have different capabilities. You can give me because you have different qualities. We are different, we are diverse, therefore we can become one. We can give and take. There's a possibility of exchange. But if we are uniform, then there's no possibility of exchange, no possibility of a union. Any other?
I think this modernity is related to the evolution of society. So we need not worry about this modernity, what happens. Because in the traditional culture, where the resources were much, the population was also less, and people had sufficient, whether it is for the eating or for anything else. But now the population, as the population has exploded, the resources have become much less, and there is some sort of the survival of the fittest. So this, I think, is a natural process.
Yeah. Actually, this is the most sort of a pernicious doctrine that is today propagated by certain sections, to survival of the fittest. Therefore, this same thing is used, to legitimize neo-colonialism, neo-imperialism, and legitimize even germ warfare on the third world countries. Get rid of the populations of the third world so that there will be enough resources. Survival of the fittest, those who are fit, they can survive. On this planet, the others will, they have the right to survive. So this whole evolution is made use of as an ideology, an ideology of cultural conquest and imperialism. Historically, I do grant that as a result of population, the traditional economies could not have maintained as it existed in those days. Even my family, when I was young, we had a property in about 8 different places, so many acres of land. But my father had 12 children, can you imagine? And the property has to be divided. Next generation, again, if each one has got 8 or 9 children, again divided. Finally it becomes, half an acre or a few cents. So, naturally the problem arises there. They will have to find different ways of coping with the problem. And we may have found different ways of coping with the problem, but what actually happened was we were confronted with colonialism. The colonial invasion of the country, a different system was imposed, and our traditional sciences, they were neglected. We have the words of Claude Alvarez here, about traditional science and so on, Claude Alvarez, who is working with this Center for Development Studies in Delhi. Suppose there was no colonialism, well, we might have developed other sciences as we have developed Ayurveda, for instance. Ayurveda is not a Western thing. And we would have tried to cope with the problem. How society would have developed, we can't say. They would have found out other solutions, Probably we would have had other problems. But we didn't evolve. It was not an evolution from tradition to modernity. It is colonialism. Something came from outside, and I don't say that is the source of all our problems. We would have had other problems, even if there was no colonialism, but then we would have solved it in different ways.
So regarding individualistic, where the production is surplus, we are seeing more emphasis on individualistic. Production, where surplus production is there, more emphasis on individualistic. When the production is less, not the individualistic, if the community is focused. Am I correct? What is the contradiction?
Why?
I think
Grandfather's days, you didn't come across anybody who owned lands much more than pertaining, and then they were selling.
What happens in the West? There is surplus of production, so they emphasis on individualistic. But we have no such production. You see, less production, but we lose our focus on individualistic.
The surplus of production, actually, the reason for the emergence of private property is to increase production. You see, because when you have, for instance, we had joint family, till about 50 years ago in our country, or 100 years ago, the majority of the families were joint families, and there was no individual production at all. Joint family produced, and naturally, in a joint family, it has its own advantages. There's a common interest and all that, but everything was managed by the Karnavar, or by the head of the family, joint family. So naturally there is less scope for individual initiative, and there being less individual initiative, there will be a chance of less production suffering, you see. Therefore, one reason why that joint family system could not continue was precisely because within that sector they could not produce enough. There was not enough individual initiative, you see. Therefore, this surplus production, if at all there is, it is more a result of individual initiative, than anything else. You see, if you take traditional societies, they didn't think of surplus. You see, there the main aim was the reproduction of society. There, you see, the same level of production must be reproduced. They must be able to live in the same way next year also. They never thought in terms of producing more and living on a different level, you see. They only thought of the cyclic movement, there's a question of reproduction. There's no question of new or higher or greater production. That didn't occur to them. It doesn't occur to even our tribals today. Tribals never think of saving. They don't have that saving mentality at all. They just want to, they live because tomorrow the whole community is responsible for me. I don't have to worry that much, because the whole community will look after me if tomorrow there is something happening. They are not worried about that, you see.
I know we can say it was the traditional society, because even many 2-3 centuries back also, we can see in our society there are people who used to give loans with interest. So even though people do not say, very often people say in terms of ornaments, not in terms of cash or something else.
Yeah.
But very often the rich people say in terms of ornaments or jewels or something like that. So that's also a kind of saving. So they also want to produce surplus. So I don't know whether we can say
This, what I said is this saving mentality that is much more true of tribal society. As we proceed, historically we, move with society. You see, tribal society, then we have caste society, then we have now caste and class society. Actually, we should call Indian society classed society. We combine two words, caste and class, and coin a new word, class society. That's what we have today, class society, you see. So, and you will find this sort of phenomenon arising in course of time, you see. Even for commerce, you see, in the interstices of society, you will find, if you take older society, commerce and money lending and all that, you'll find that. But I am speaking about the general. If you take generally in early society, the farther back we go, the less we have this idea of saving for the future. That didn't occur to them because the whole community moved and lived together, you see. The whole community, if something happened, the whole community looked after you. Even today, if you go to any village, I went recently to Kerala, where we have a Jesuit house. It is situated in a village, where the scholastics, when the students, when they go out, every family knows them. And all of them, you see, are sort of asked, where are you going? And this sort of thing, you see, this sort of entirely a different sort of an atmosphere. If you are producing ever new cars and so on, you see, I as consumer must also have ever new needs. Otherwise I won't buy. Therefore you will add some speciality, you see, for instance, some gadgets you will add to the car which is an attraction, for instance. Some gadget, some automatic thing, you see, then people realize, that's the thing, we will buy that kind of car. I'm going for that. So our needs also become obsolete. We give up our earlier needs and we assume new needs. Obsolescence. And Whereas in a truly developed society, you see, naturally there will be change in our needs and so on, you see, but it will not be a response to the law, to an economic law, a necessary economic law. It will not be subject to manipulation and engineering from outside. It will be again a spontaneous evolution of our needs, not something dictated to from outside. Now, so far about the material aspect, the economic aspect of our development, what I envisage as a developed society. I am calling in question many of the criteria which are used today to measure development and projecting a new type of set of criteria. Then another important need, that is the ecotic need. I am coining the word, I have not seen any so far that word anywhere, but as I told you, originally echo comes from the Greek word oikos. Oikos means home. It is from that word we again have economy. Economy means the nomos, the logos, the law regarding home management, budget, you see. That's the original meaning of the word economy. And but home here means nature. Not the home the house where we stay, but nature as a whole is our home. This world of, this universe of sun, moon, stars, rivers, this is our home, our common home. It is our oikos. And with regard to the oikos, we have needs. Now, if you take the capitalist development, that has been going on for years in our country and also abroad. Underlying it, there is an attitude to the oikos, an attitude to the nature. What is that attitude? That attitude is dictated by or governed by science and technology. And at the basis of science and technology is, first of all, a division between subject and object. I am here a subject, and nature is the object. Rivers and plants, animals, everything is object outside me. And as a human being, my aim is to conquer nature. Nature is something to be conquered. It's to be subjugated. And even Yahweh told us in Genesis, go and subdue the earth. You subdue, conquer it. This attitude is very much under the kind of civilization that we are witnessing today, which is developing also very fast in India. And this attitude of conquering nature is also the underlying force of science. Generally, we take science as something that promotes our development. In fact, Marx also thought that science will liberate humanity. But today we are having second thoughts from that. Of course, we admit some positive contributions made by modern science, but science in itself, if you take it, you see it has certain negative aspects. First of all, science is analytic. It doesn't see reality as a whole, but it divides reality into segments, into parts, and we study part by part. So there's a division, you see. Science goes on dividing. Again, in my youth, we had only dentists. People who attend at your teeth. Today, they have divided. You have orthodontist that is straighten your teeth. Orthos means straight. If your teeth are a bit crooked, straighten. Orthodontic Then we have periodontics. Perio means around the teeth. Around the teeth you have gums. Those attend to gums. And nowadays we have dentists who are periodontists only of beautiful girls. Only girls who come there and they attend to that sort of thing. So they are given division. Then some other dentists today, they put, it is not necessary, it is enough to fill it with cement or whatever it is. Instead, they will put a gold cap. You have to pay about 500 rupees for that thing, you see. So some specialize in that. This sort of division analysis is essential to modern science. As a result of it, you don't look at reality as a whole. It's analytic. It is reductionist, modern science. Reductionist. You reduce the whole of reality to one element, to that which is quantifiable, that which can be measured. You are interested only in that which can be measured, quantifiable. Quantum means how much. How much? That's the meaning of the word, is Latin word quantum. Means how much. You must be able to measure and say how much. 10 feet long. 50 kilos, how much, you see. So it is reductionist, reduce of everything, the whole of reality, to that which can be measured. If it is your wife, you will, if you are a scientist, you can reduce her, analytically to so much of water, so much of gas, so much of carbon, so much of phosphate. You see, this is, sum total of all this. I hope you are not applying to anybody. So apply to everybody, including myself. So, everything is reduced to the quantitative. Even your lust can be reduced to quantitative. When you are emotionally involved in somebody, and you just have a cardiograph or, and you will get it with so many numbers. You will get a chart. How much you just again reduce everything to the quantifiable. In that process, quality is lost sight of. And we are the kingdom of numbers. Kingdom of numbers. That's why you have a computer here. You deal with numbers. That's the world. Modern science is reductionist. Modern science also is cybernetic. 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 Kubernetes in Greek means is the one who steers the boat. One will sit behind, how do you call that part of the boat? I don't know. And then steer the boat, So the aim of science is to steer the development of human beings and the planet, so that you can even foresee, what will happen in 10-15 years. That's cybernetics. You intervene in nature and you insert certain new elements, and then you find out how that particular object into which you have inserted this artificial element will behave in 10 years from now. You see. So you can foresee, you can predict. In that sense, futurology is part of modern science. I think it's N now.